I'm a security guard. Last night I opened a unit that has been rented since before this facility existed. I need someone to explain what I found. Posted to our Nalep. I want to be upfront about something before I start. I am not the kind of person who believes in things I don't have a sign. I didn't watch scary movies as a kid because I found them boring, not frightening. When my ex-wife left, she said the problem was that I was too literal, too grounded, too committed to only what I could see and verify and measure. She wasn't wrong. I am a man who trusts receipts, timestamps, and his own two eyes. I'm telling you this so you understand that what I'm about to describe is not something I'm inclined toward. I have no history of sleepwalking or night terrors. I don't drink on shift. I am, professionally and personally, a very boring person. My name is Dale Pruitt. I am 51 years old. I have worked the overnight security shift at Store King Self-Storage on Route 9 in Ashton, New Jersey for just over 3 years. I check locks. I do my rounds. I fill out incident reports about raccoons getting into the dumpster. That's the job. That's the whole job. Last Thursday night, at approximately 2:14 in the morning, I opened Unit 214. I need to tell you everything, in order, so you understand how it happened and why I can't explain it. Part 1. The missing lock. Store King has 340 units arranged in 6 long rows labeled A through F. Each unit has a steel roll-up door, a concrete floor, and a padlock loop welded to the frame. Tenants bring their own locks. Management doesn't have keys. That's how self-storage works. Privacy is the product. My route takes about 40 minutes if I'm being thorough, which I always am. Row A, then B, then C, down the interior, back up D, E, F, and finish at the office. I check every padlock by grabbing it and giving it a pull. It takes maybe 2 seconds per unit. Grab, pull, move on. 3 years of nights. And I've done this thousands of times. Row C is the third row from the east. Unit numbers run 200 to 239. I reached Unit 214 at approximately 2:09 a.m. based on my checkpoint log. The padlock was gone. Not broken off. Not cut. Gone. The loop was intact. The paint around it was undisturbed. But the lock that had been there, a heavy gauge master lock, matte black, the same one I had checked and noted as secure on every single shift for 3 years, was not there. I stood in front of the door for a moment. Then I checked my log going back a week. Unit 214, secure. Unit 214, secure. Unit 214, secure. Every entry the same, because every night it had been the same. I knocked. No response. I called out, Store King Security, is anyone present in Unit 214? Nothing. No movement. No sound. I went back to the office and pulled the rental record. Unit 214 had been continuously rented since 1987. The original tenant name on the lease was listed as R. Voss. No first name on the physical file, just an initial. The lease renewed annually in cash, mailed in, a money order every January, same amount. Same P.O. Box return address in Hackensack. No phone number on record. No emergency contact. The file was thin and old and smelled like the inside of a safe. I looked at the address of the facility on the lease header. Then I looked at it again. Store King Self-Storage on Route 9 in Ashton, New Jersey. Was built in 1993. The building I was currently sitting inside. The concrete and steel structure that had not existed before 1993. The original lease for Unit 214 was dated March 4, 1987. Part 2. What was inside? I documented everything before I opened it. I wrote the time in my log. I took a photo of the open loop. I made a note that the unit appeared to have no active padlock and that I was opening it to check for unauthorized access or abandoned property. I did everything right. I was very careful to do everything right, because even then, standing in front of that door at 2:14 in the morning, I had a feeling I wanted a record. The door rolled up smoothly. No resistance. The hinges were silent. Someone had maintained this door. The unit was 10 by 15 feet. Standard size. Concrete floor. Drop ceiling with a single fluorescent tube on a pull chain. I found the chain in the dark and pulled it. The light buzzed on. There was nothing in the unit except a wooden shipping crate, approximately 4 feet wide by 4 feet tall by 3 feet deep. Unpainted pine. Assembled with flathead screws. No shipping label. No marking of any kind. It sat in the center of the floor with 8 or 9 inches of clearance on all sides, centered with a precision that suggested someone had taken the time to measure. I am not a small man. I am 6'1" and I spent 12 years working warehouse logistics before this job, so I have some sense of how to move things and how much things weigh. I put my hands on the crate and rocked it. It was heavy. Not unmovably heavy, but deliberate heavy. Packed. There was no lock on the crate. There were butterfly clasps on the front panel. 4 of them. top to bottom. I unlatched them one by one. I want to be honest about what I was thinking at that moment. I was thinking about whether it smelled. I was thinking about the weight. I was thinking about whether I was about to open something I should have called the police about first. It didn't smell like anything. It smelled like paper. I swung the front panel open. The crate was packed floor to ceiling with photographs. Thousands of them, printed on standard photo paper, 4x6. Stacked in dense bundles held together with rubber bands. Each bundle was labeled on the top photograph in black marker. Not a date, not a name, but a number. 001, 002, 003. Continuing as far back in the crate as I could see, I picked up bundle 001. The top photograph was of a man in a Store King uniform walking down row C. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. The way it takes a moment to recognize your own voice on a recording. The angle was from above and behind. Slightly wide, like a camera mounted at ceiling height at the far end of the row. The man's head was down, one hand out to the side in the motion of grabbing a padlock. His shoulders were the shoulders I see in mirrors. It was me. It was me on a Tuesday night in November based on the frost visible on the door frames and the configuration of the Christmas lights someone had strung on the office eve before Thanksgiving. It was me doing my rounds. I went through the bundle slowly. 43 photographs. All of me. All at Store King. All from angles that didn't correspond to any camera I had ever been aware of. Looking at the maintenance log on the office wall. Eating a sandwich in my car with the window down. Standing at the north entrance watching a car turn out onto Route 9 at 4 a.m. Not dramatic moments. Not meaningful moments. Just me, existing in this job. On what appeared to be 43 different nights. I put bundle 001 down. I picked up bundle 017 at random. Same subject. Different nights. Different angles. One photograph appeared to have been taken through the small window in the office door. The camera outside in the dark. The frame catching me asleep in the chair with my logbook open on the desk in front of me. I have fallen asleep in that chair. I know the specific tilt of my own head when I go under. I went to the back of the crate and found the last bundle. It was labeled 341. The photographs in bundle 341 were in color. The same 4x6 format, but sharper than the earlier ones. Better equipment, I assumed. More recent. I flipped through them. Me in the parking lot. Me on row A. Me on row D. Me in the office. All recent. I could tell from my haircut. Shorter on the side since my barber retired and I found someone new. And from the absence of the holiday lights, which had come down in January. The last photograph in bundle 341 was at the bottom of the stack. I was standing in the doorway of unit 214. The door was rolled up behind me. My hand was on the door frame. I was looking into the unit. In the photograph, the unit appeared to be dark. The fluorescent light had not yet been pulled, or the image was taken in the half-second before I found the chain. My face was turned slightly away from the camera but not entirely. The expression on the visible part of my face was not the expression I would have predicted for a man about to open a mysterious crate in a storage unit at 2 in the morning. I looked calm. I looked, if anything, tired. The timestamp in the corner of the photograph. I hadn't noticed it on the earlier ones, but they all had it. A small digital stamp in the bottom right. Read April 17, 2025. 2:14 am. That was tonight. That was 11 minutes ago, plus or minus. I was holding a photograph of myself, taken from inside Unit 214. At the moment I opened Unit 214, I put the photograph down on top of the crate with extreme care. The way you put a glass down when your hands are shaking but you don't want to admit your hands are shaking. Then I stood very still for what I estimate was about 30 seconds. Then I turned around to look at the back of the unit. Part 3. The wall. I don't know how I missed it the first time. The crate had drawn my attention completely, I think. The way a specific thing draws you when a room is mostly empty. But the back wall of Unit 214 was covered. Not in photographs this time. In paper. Documents. Mostly. Photocopies. Handwritten notes. Printouts. Things cut from what appeared to be newspapers. They were tacked to the wall with pushpins. Dozens of them. Overlapping in places. In an arrangement that was not chaotic but organized, with lines of string connecting certain documents to others in the way you see in detective movies. I had always considered that kind of display cinematic nonsense, but standing there, I understood why someone would do it. The strings made the relationships visible. At the center of the display was a name. My name. A printout of what appeared to be my original Store King employment application. My signature visible at the bottom, stapled to a copy of my driver's license from 2021. Around it, extending outward like a web, were other documents. My work history going back to my warehouse job in 2001. My divorce filing from 2018. My son's birth announcement from 1997. From the Ashton Courier, which my mother had framed and which still hangs in her hallway. A photocopy of a lease agreement for my current apartment on Birch Street. Utility bills. A printed screenshot of what appeared to be my banking app. Account balance visible. And further out from my name, connected by strings to my name but also to each other, were other people, other names, other documents. I recognized two of them, my ex-wife, Karen, and my son, Marcus, who is 27 and lives in Portland. They had their own clusters of documents, smaller than mine but substantial. I didn't recognize the other four names. There were photographs of their faces, printed, not taken, like research photographs, alongside their own clusters. Two men, two women, different ages, no names I knew. At the top of the wall, above everything else, was a single index card tacked with a single pushpin on it, in the same black marker used on the photograph bundles. Someone had written, "You were always going to open this door." I left the unit. I didn't lock it. There was no lock. I walked back to the office and sat down. I looked at the time. It was 2:41 a.m. I didn't call the police immediately, and I've been asked about that. So let me explain. When something happens that your brain cannot file correctly, the immediate response isn't action. It's a kind of stunned stillness, like a buffer spinning on a screen. I sat in that chair and I thought about the lease date. I thought about bundle 001. I thought about the index card. I thought about the photograph of me opening the door of unit 214. The timestamp. The way the camera would have had to have been positioned to take it. If the photograph was taken from inside the unit, and the unit was sealed when I arrived, then whoever took it was inside the unit while I was outside it. After I opened the door, I walked to the crate. I did not look at the back wall until later. If someone had been in the unit when I opened it, I would have seen them. Unless they were behind the crate. Unless they left while I was looking at the photographs. I went back to unit 214 with a flashlight. I examined every surface. The unit has a solid concrete floor, solid cinder block walls, a drop ceiling with standard tile. I pushed up 3 ceiling tiles and shone the flashlight into the gap above them. Nothing. No panel in the floor. No seams in the walls. I stood in the unit and I tried to find another way in or out and I could not find one. The unit has one door. The door I opened. Part 4. What I know about our boss. I spent the rest of my shift going through the rental office records. There wasn't much. The original lease from 1987 was the oldest document we had. When Store King took over the property from a prior operator, Greenway Storage, in 2003, most of the older records were transferred informally, a banker's box of folders, half of which were missing or damaged. The Greenway records for Unit 214 going back to the original 1987 lease were in the box. Greenway Storage had operated at this address from 1986 to 2002. Before Greenway, according to the county property records I found online during my shift, the land was a contractor's yard. Before that, an orchard. So the 1987 lease wasn't for this building. It was for a Greenway building at this address, which would make more sense. When Store King built the current facility in 1993, they apparently absorbed the existing Greenway tenants, and Unit 214, presumably at a different address within the original Greenway layout, was transferred to the current space. I thought that explained the lease date, and I felt briefly better about it. Then I found the 1993 transfer paperwork. When Store King moved the Greenway tenants into the new facility, each unit received a transfer agreement. Old unit number, new unit number, same tenant, new address. Standard administrative paper. The transfer sheet for what became Unit 214 was in the file. The original Greenway unit number was Unit 214. Same number, different building. The Greenway Unit 214 had also been rented continuously, in cash, by our boss, going back to the 1987 lease. And stapled behind the 1987 lease was a reference to an earlier file, a note in someone's handwriting, transferred from original Voss account. See pre-86 records. Greenway file room. The Greenway file room records had not been included in the 2003 transfer box. Our boss had been renting a unit at this address, under a series of operators, before 1986. Before I was born. Before my parents met. Part 5. The 4 names. I went back to the wall. I photographed everything with my phone. All 4 names. All the documents. When I got home after my shift, I looked them up. The first name, a woman, mid-40s based on the photograph, Returned no results I could verify as connected to Ashton or to Store King. Her documents on the wall included what appeared to be a library card and a printout of what looked like medical records, though the details were too small to read in my photographs. The second name, a man, older, maybe early 60s, was more findable. He appeared in an archived local news article from 2019 as a witness to a minor traffic incident on Route 9. Route 9 runs past Store King. I don't want to share the names publicly. I'm going to contact these people, if I can find them, before I post this. I think they deserve to know before strangers start looking them up. What I can tell you is that 2 of the 4 names have, in the past 2 weeks, posted in online forums about strange experiences. Not our Nalep. One posted in a thread about unexplained mail, receiving documents they didn't request, things like copies of their own records. Another posted something I found in a local Facebook group, a brief and confused message about a package delivered to their home containing photographs they didn't recognize of themselves, mailed from a P.O. box in Hackensack. A P.O. box in Hackensack. Part 6. What happened at the end of my shift? At 5:50 a.m. 20 minutes before my relief arrived, I did my final round. I don't know why. Habit, mostly. And I think part of me needed to walk the rows again, to feel the normalcy of the route. I reached Unit 214. The door was still up, the way I'd left it. I stood at the threshold and shone my light in. The crate was gone. Not moved. Gone. The unit was empty. Clean concrete. 4 walls. The fluorescent light still buzzing on its pull chain. The wall in the back was bare. Not stripped bare. Bare the way a wall is bare when nothing has ever been on it. No push pin holes. No marks. No string. The only evidence that I had seen anything at all was my phone, which contains photographs of the wall, the crate, the bundles, and the photographs themselves. And the final photograph from bundle 341, which I had left sitting on top of the crate, which was now in my shirt pocket. I don't remember putting it there. I'm certain I put it down on the crate. I cannot account for it being in my pocket, but it is. It's in front of me right now on my kitchen table. Me, standing in the doorway of Unit 214, at 2:14 a.m. Timestamp confirmed. Looking in, the door of the unit is up in the photograph. The interior is dark, but if you look closely, and I have been looking closely for the past 6 hours, there is something visible in the dark of the unit, behind where the crate would be, in the area of the back wall. It is rectangular. It is too small and too dark for me to be certain what it is, but I have been staring at it long enough that I think I know. It looks like a camera. Update. Posted 11:42 a.m. I called the non-emergency police line this morning. An officer came out to Store King, reviewed the unit, found nothing, reviewed my photos on my phone, took a report. The rental file for Unit 214 is still there. The officer contacted the P.O. box address in Hackensack, which turns out to be a mail forwarding service. The box is registered to a business called Voss Documentation Services, LLC, incorporated in Delaware in 2004. Delaware incorporation records are not public. The officer said she would follow up. Unit 214 is, as of this morning, repadlocked. New master lock, matte black, installed by Store King Management. The new tenant name on the file is listed as R. Voss. A money order arrived in the morning mail, January dated, already processed by the previous office manager who apparently assumed it was a routine renewal and didn't question the timing. My relief. A guy named Pete who has worked the day shift for 6 years, told me that Unit 214 has always been a closed unit. Rented, paid up, never accessed in his experience. He said the previous overnight guy, a man who left the job before I started, had mentioned it once, saying the unit was already there when he got here and he'd never seen anyone go in or out. I asked Pete if he knew the previous overnight guy's name. He said he thought it was Dale. He wasn't sure. He'd never met him. I have been the overnight security guard at this facility for 3 years. Before me, there was no overnight security guard. The position was created for me specifically when I applied. I know this because it was mentioned in my offer letter as a new initiative. I'm going to try to sleep now. I've left my son a voicemail. He hasn't called back yet. I'm going to try again in an hour. I don't know what our boss wants. I don't know how long I've been watched or why or whether the other 4 names on that wall are in similar positions to mine, receiving the same information at the same time, finding photographs of themselves in storage units in other towns. What I know is this: the lease for Unit 214 precedes me. The photographs of me precede my hiring. Someone arranged for that job to exist, and arranged for me to take it, and has been documenting me ever since. The index card said I was always going to open that door. I'm starting to think that's true. I'm starting to think the door was opened for me before I was ever old enough to walk through it. I'll update when I know more. If you know anything about VOS documentation services, or if you've received unsolicited packages from a P.O. box in Hackensack, please reach out. I'll be up. I can't sleep anyway. Update. Posted 7:18 p.m. Same day. Marcus called back. He was calm at first. The way he gets when he's deciding whether to be worried about me. He's heard things in my voice over the years. The year his mother and I split. The year I lost the warehouse job. The 18 months between things when I was sleeping on my brother's couch in Tom's River. He knows how I sound when I'm fine and when I am absolutely not fine but am claiming to be. He listened to the whole thing. When I was done, he didn't say anything for a moment. Then he asked me to send him the photograph. The one from bundle 341. The one that's been on my kitchen table all day. I photographed it with my phone and texted it to him. He called back 40 seconds later. Dad, he said, that's the parking lot. I told him I knew. I had recognized Store King's parking lot in the background of the photograph. No, he said, that's the parking lot of your apartment building. Look at the far left edge of the photo. That's the dumpster enclosure on Birch Street. I know what it looks like because I helped you move in. I picked up the photograph and looked at it again. He's right. The background isn't the Store King facility. I had assumed, without looking closely enough, that the concrete and the lighting and the corrugated wall behind me were Store King. They're not. The partial view of the enclosure in the left edge of the frame. Dark green corrugated plastic. The latch I've touched 100 times taking out my trash, is the dumpster outside my building. The photograph of me standing in the doorway of Unit 214 was not taken inside Unit 214. It was taken outside my apartment building at 2:14 in the morning while I was at Store King. Someone was at my apartment at 2:14 a.m. taking a photograph of a door. I'm not going home tonight. I called in and told Pete I'd cover his day shift tomorrow and he could take my overnight. He didn't ask questions, which is one of the things I appreciate about Pete. I'm at my brother's in Tom's River. I have the deadbolt and the chain on. Part 7. Lydia Marsh. One of the 4 names on the wall is Lydia Marsh. I'm using her name with her permission. She reached out to me through a private message on this account roughly 4 hours after I posted the original story, and we've been on the phone twice since then. She said she recognized the description of the wall and the packages and didn't want to be found by strangers before she'd talked to me. She said she'd been waiting for someone to post something like this. She's been waiting for 2 years. Lydia is 44 years old. She lives in Maplewood, New Jersey, about 40 minutes from Ashton. She works in hospital administration. She is, by her own description, not the kind of person who believes in things either, which, given everything, strikes me as a meaningful coincidence. 2 years ago, a package arrived at her home. No return address. Inside was a manila envelope containing 40 photographs of herself at her workplace, at the Maplewood Library branch she uses, at the coffee shop on Baker Street where she goes on Saturday mornings. Also inside the envelope was a handwritten note on plain white paper with a single sentence. Your name is on a wall in Ashton. She did not know what that meant. She had no connection to Ashton. She looked up self-storage facilities in Ashton, New Jersey. She found Store King. She drove to Store King on a Saturday afternoon and walked around the exterior for 10 minutes until a day shift employee came out and asked if she needed help. She said she was looking for a specific unit. She said she thought her name might be associated with it. The employee checked the records. No tenant named Lydia Marsh. She left. She has received 11 packages in the 2 years since. Each one contains photographs. Each one contains a note. The notes have not repeated a sentence. They're not threatening. They're not friendly. They're informational, the way a field report is informational. She brought them all with her when she met me in person this afternoon. My brother's girlfriend made coffee and then made herself scarce, which was considerate of her. I read all 11 notes. I'm going to reproduce 3 of them here, with Lydia's permission. Note 2. There are 5 of you. You are not the first and you are not the last. Note 7. The one who watches does not want to be found. The one who watches wants you to understand what it means to be seen. Note 11. Received 9 days ago. The guard will open the door on April 17th. He will need to know your name. Part 8. What I found when I went back to the office. I've been on the phone with the officer who took my report. Her name is Detective Renata Cho and she has been, so far, the most useful person in this situation other than Lydia. She ran VOS Documentation Services, LLC through every database available to her and got very little. The Delaware Incorporation in 2004, a registered agent at a law firm in Wilmington, No other public filings. The registered agent firm told her they had no active contact information for the principals and that their arrangement was limited to accepting service of process. Nobody had ever served process. Nobody had apparently ever needed to. She asked me to go back to the Store King office and pull every document that mentioned Unit 214 or the Voss account. Not just the records I'd already looked at, but anything. Lease renewals, maintenance requests, correspondence. Anything filed in the physical folder. I did this afternoon before driving to Toms River. Behind the renewal records, held together with a binder clip, was a set of documents I hadn't seen the first time. I don't know how I missed them. They were in the folder, behind the transfer paperwork, and either my eyes had skipped them in the 3 a.m. haze of that first night or they had been placed there since. The first was a photocopy of a black and white photograph, printed on plain paper. It showed the exterior of a building I didn't immediately recognize. A long, low structure with a flat roof. The kind of utilitarian commercial construction that could be from anywhere in the mid-20th century. Handwritten on the back in faded pencil. Voss & Son Document Storage. RT 9, Ashton, 1961. Route 9 in Ashton. This address. In 1961. The contractor's yard. The orchard. There was something else here first. Decades before any of that. A document storage business. Voss & Son. The second document was a handwritten letter. 2 pages. Dated 1974. The handwriting was deliberate and old-fashioned. The letters formed with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to write before ballpoint pens. It was addressed to no one and signed with a single initial. R. I'm going to type out the relevant sections as accurately as I can. The project continues in satisfactory form. Subjects respond to observation in predictable patterns. Awareness of being watched changes behavior in ways that can be documented and studied. But subjects who do not know they are being watched reveal something more essential. I have always believed this. The camera does not lie, but more importantly, the camera does not judge. It simply accumulates. There are those who will say this work is a violation. I have considered this objection at length and concluded that it is not. To document a life is to honor it. To maintain a record of someone's days, their habits, their hours, their small persistent rituals, is to insist that those days matter, that the person living them matters. I am not taking anything from my subjects. I am giving them permanence they would not otherwise have. My father began this work in 1948. He kept his records here on RT9 when this was still our building. I have continued in the spaces that followed, maintaining the same account number, the same approach, the same commitment to the work. The subjects change. The documentation does not. My current subject has been with the project for 11 years. When he retires from the project, I will select the next. The criteria have not changed since my father established them. A person of routine, employed in a role that requires nightly presence at this address, with no strong expectation that their ordinary life will be witnessed by others. The night shift worker, the watchman, the man who guards a place full of other people's stored memories while accumulating none of his own. I select them because they are, in the language of photography, underexposed. I intend to correct that. I sat in the Store King parking lot and read that letter 3 times. Then I drove to Toms River. R. Voss's father started this in 1948. R. Voss continued it sometime around or before 1974. The letter mentions an 11-year subject. The 1986 note in the file references a pre-existing Voss account, assuming each subject lasts 10 to 15 years, and the documentation bundles in the crate numbered 341. Suggesting roughly that many documentation sessions across 3+ years for me alone. Then there have been subjects before me, other night shift guards, or night shift equivalents, at whatever occupied this address in each decade. Watched, documented, given, as the letter says, permanence. I don't know if that should make me feel better or worse. I haven't decided. What I know is that someone has been maintaining this project, this vigil, this archive, at this address since at least 1948. That's 77 years. R. Voss wrote that letter in 1974. If R. Voss were, say, 40 years old in 1974, they would be 91 now. If they were 30, they'd be 81. Both are possible. Neither is the age of someone personally climbing around Store King at 2:14 in the morning placing cameras and removing crates. Either R. Voss has help, or R. Voss has passed the project to someone else, or the initial in the file does not stand for what I've been assuming it stands for. Lydia's note said, there are 5 of you. You are not the first and you are not the last. I've been assuming the 5 referred to the names on the wall. Me, Lydia, and 3 others. Tonight, lying on my brother's couch, I started wondering if the 5 referred to something else. 5 subjects. 5 people who, at different points, Filled the same role I fill. Night shift workers at this address. The watched. If that's the case, I'm not the current subject. I'm the end of the current chapter. The crate was a reveal, not a continuation. They showed me the archive because the archive for me is complete, which means someone new is starting. Part 9. The third name. I found him through the forum post Lydia helped me trace. His name is Gerald Fitch. He's 58. Recently retired from a facilities management job in Parsippany. He lives alone in a condo in Clifton. He was the one who posted in the unexplained mail thread about receiving copies of his own records. I called him at 9 p.m. He picked up on the second ring, which suggested he'd been waiting for a call, or was the kind of person who always answers unknown numbers, or both. I told him my name. He said, "The Store King guy." He'd read my post. Gerald received his first package 18 months ago. Same format as Lydia's. Manila envelope. Photographs of himself. Note on plain paper. His note said, "You worked near here once. You will again." He had worked near Ashton in 2019 and 2020. His facilities job had included a contract with the light industrial park on Route 9, less than a mile from Store King. He'd driven past the facility twice a week for nearly 2 years. He never applied for a job at Store King. He never had any reason to. After his facilities contract ended, he moved on to other sites, and eventually retired. Gerald said something when I asked him how he felt about the packages. He thought about it for a long time before he answered. "Relieved," he said. "Is that strange? I know it should be frightening, but there's something about knowing that someone was paying attention. My kids live in Arizona. I don't see them more than twice a year. I go to the grocery store. I watch TV. I take my walk. Nobody is much interested in any of that. And then these packages started coming and I thought, someone thought my Tuesday was worth recording. Someone thought I was worth the trouble." He paused. "That's probably why they pick people like us," he said. "We're not hard to hook." I didn't have an answer for that. I still don't. Part 10. Friday night. I went back to work Friday night. Pete offered to swap again, but I told him no. The job was mine. If I didn't go back, I wasn't sure I'd ever go back. And the job is what I have. I'm not sentimental about it, but I'm also not in a position to walk away from steady income and health insurance at 51. I did my rounds. Row A through F. The full route. The way I always do it. I pulled every padlock. I wrote every entry. When I got to row C and unit 214, I stopped. The new master lock was in place. Matte black. Heavy gauge. I grabbed it and pulled it. Solid. I wrote in my log, unit 214. Secure. Then I stood there for another minute, which is not something I do. 2 seconds per unit is the protocol. But I stood there and I looked at the door and I thought about the letter. The underexposed. The man who guards other people's stored memories while accumulating none of his own. I thought about my son in Portland and about Karen and about my mother's hallway with the framed birth announcement. I thought about Gerald Fitch taking his walk in Clifton and feeling, against all reason, seen. I finished my round. I made coffee. I sat down in the chair in the office where I have sat on every overnight shift for 3 years and will, in all likelihood, continue to sit for some time to come. At 3:40 a.m., my phone buzzed. A notification from an email address I don't use often. The one associated with this Reddit account. A new message. No subject line. The sender address was a string of random characters at a domain I didn't recognize. The body of the email contained 4 words and a number. Bundle 342 begins tonight. I read it twice. Then I looked up at the ceiling of the office. The fluorescent light. The drop tiles. The ordinary nothing of it. And I thought about cameras, about whether I had ever really been alone in this room, about what it would mean if the answer was no. I thought about the letter. To document a life is to honor it. I turned back to my logbook. I picked up my pen, and because it was what time it was and what I was here to do, I wrote the time, the temperature outside, and the condition of the lot. Clear, quiet, no incidents. I don't know what our boss wants with me. I don't know who is carrying on the project now, or whether I'll ever know. I don't know what the 5 names on the wall are meant to become together, or what role Lydia and Gerald and I are supposed to play in a story that apparently started before any of us were born. But I know this. I'm going to keep doing my rounds. I'm going to keep checking the padlocks. I'm going to write my entries and drink my bad coffee and be exactly who I have always been, in exactly the place where someone decided, 70-some years ago, before this building existed, before my parents met, that I would eventually stand. The index card was right. I was always going to open that door. I just didn't know the door had been built for me. Update. Saturday, 9:03 a.m. Detective Cho called this morning. Boss Documentation Services. LLC was voluntarily dissolved in February of this year. 2 months ago, the registered agent received the dissolution paperwork via certified mail. The signatory was listed as E. Voss, not R. Not an initial I'd seen before. E. Voss. I thought about the letter from 1974. My father began this work in 1948. I continued. R. Voss continued from the father. If E. Voss dissolved the company, who is E? A child of R? A grandchild? The next in a line that goes back to a man running a document storage business on Route 9 in 1948, who one day pointed a camera at a night watchman and decided that ordinary life, unwitnessed, was a tragedy worth correcting. Detective Cho says the dissolution doesn't end the investigation. It might, she said carefully, actually help it. Dissolved companies still have paper trails, registered agents still have addresses on file, and whoever signed that paperwork signed their name. E. Voss. I'll be on the overnight again tonight, and tomorrow night, and the night after. Bundle 342 is apparently already in progress, whatever that means. Wherever the cameras are, I've decided I don't mind. Not because I'm not unsettled. I am. Deeply. In the way you're unsettled when the floor of the world turns out to be slightly different from what you'd assumed. But because Gerald was right, in his quiet retired man way. There's something about knowing someone thought your Tuesday was worth recording. I'm going to find E. Voss. I'm going to find the other 2 names from the wall. I'm going to understand what this project is and what we are to each other, the 5 of us, and what it means that someone has been standing vigil over this address since before the Korean War. But tonight I'll do my rounds. I'll check 340 padlocks. I'll write my entries in the log. And when I reach unit 214, I'll grab the lock and give it a pull. Secure. Same as always. Same as it was before I knew any of this. And the same as it will be long after I figure out the rest. I'll keep you posted. Part 11. The Wilmington address. Detective Cho called again on Monday morning. She'd followed the dissolution paperwork to the registered agent in Wilmington, a small firm called Castellan Administrative Services that handles incorporations for about 400 Delaware LLCs. The attorney she spoke with was cooperative up to the edge of what he could legally share, which wasn't much. But he confirmed one thing that mattered. The dissolution had been signed not in Wilmington, not in Hackensack, but in Ashton, New Jersey. The notary stamp on the paperwork was from a UPS store on Elm Street in Ashton. He faxed Cho a copy of the signature page. The signature read, in full, Eleanor Voss. Eleanor Voss. E. Voss. A woman, then. Or at least a name that suggested one. Cho ran the name through everything available. New Jersey driver's license records returned no active license for an Eleanor Voss in the state. No registered vehicles. No voter registration. No property records. The name existed exactly once in any database Cho could access. The dissolution signature for Voss Documentation Services, LLC, notarized at a UPS store on Elm Street in Ashton on February 11 of this year. Cho went to the UPS store in person. The notary on duty that day, a part-time employee, college student, 19 years old, remembered the transaction because it was unusual. The woman who came in was older, he said, very composed. She had all the documents ready and organized, which not everyone did. She paid in cash. She didn't make conversation. He described her as probably in her 60s. Gray hair, cut short. She wore a coat, dark blue. She had good posture. She was polite. She did not give her name beyond what was on the documents. He said she reminded him of a librarian. I don't know what to do with that. I wrote it down and I've been looking at it for 2 days. Part 12. The 4th and 5th names. Lydia found them. She'd been working through the forum threads and community boards more systematically than I had. She has better research instincts, she says. From years of navigating hospital information systems. She found the 4th name through a Nextdoor post in Montclair from 8 months ago, in which a man described receiving a package containing photographs of himself at his place of work. He'd deleted the post within 48 hours, but Lydia had screenshotted it before it disappeared. His name is Thomas Wren. He's 63, a retired electrician from Montclair who had a contract job, several years back, doing electrical work at a commercial property on Route 9 in Ashton. He worked the site for 4 months in the spring of 2018. He drove past Store King every day on his way to the job. Lydia tracked down a phone number through a home services review site where Thomas had left a review of a plumber in 2022. She called him before I did, with my permission, to explain what was happening. She's better at that kind of conversation than I am, she said when she told him about the wall. There was a long silence, and then he said, I knew it was connected. I just didn't know to what. Thomas received 3 packages, each 6 months apart. He stopped receiving them after the 3rd. The last note said, The record is sufficient. You will not hear from us again. He had assumed it was some kind of elaborate scam that had ultimately come to nothing. He'd never reported it to anyone. He drove out to meet us, me and Lydia and Gerald, at a diner in Cranford on Wednesday evening. It was the first time all four of us had been in the same room, which felt like something, though I couldn't have said precisely what. Thomas is a quiet man, methodical, the kind of person who waits until he's sure before he speaks. He ordered decaf and didn't touch it. He listened to everything we'd compiled. The letter, the 1948 origin, the Wilmington attorney, Eleanor Voss, and when we were done he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and set something on the table. It was a photograph, 4x6, printed on standard photo paper. A man in a hard hat and work vest standing outside a chain-link gate, the Route 9 corridor visible behind him. The Store King sign visible in the distance over his right shoulder. Him, years younger, but him. That was in the first package, he said. I kept it because I kept thinking I should show it to someone. He turned it over. On the back, in the black marker that by now I recognized as the Voss hand, T.W. Observed from April 3, 2018 to July 19, 2018. Documentation complete. Complete. The way mine said. In the crate. Bundle 341. The way a file gets closed. The fifth name is the one I haven't been able to reach, and I'm going to be careful about how much I say here. She's the youngest of us. Based on the photograph on the wall she's in her early 30s, and the documents in her cluster on the wall were different from ours in one significant way. Ours showed workplaces, routines, the apparatus of adult life and its predictable geography. Hers showed a school, a university campus, study corrals, a library reading room at what Lydia identified, from a banner in one photograph, as Rutgers, Newark. She hasn't received packages, as far as we know. She may not know she's connected to any of this. Lydia is trying to find her carefully, by which she means without frightening her. I'll update when there's something to update. Part 13. What Gerald found in his basement. Gerald called me on Thursday afternoon with a specific kind of calm in his voice that I've come to recognize. The calm of someone who has found something and sat with it for a few hours before deciding what to do. He'd gone back through everything he owned that had arrived unexpectedly in the past 18 months. Not just the packages, everything. He's the kind of man who keeps records, who puts things in labeled boxes in his basement rather than throwing them away. Among those things, he found something he'd set aside without examining closely at the time. A large padded envelope that had arrived last October with no return address and no note. He'd assumed it was a shipping error and put it in a box intending to deal with it later. He opened it Thursday afternoon. Inside was a photograph album, bound in burgundy cloth, the old kind with magnetic pages and plastic overlays. On the inside front cover, in pencil so faint Gerald needed a magnifying glass to read it, was a name and a date. Harold Fitch. 1987. Harold Fitch was Gerald's father. He died in 2009. The photographs in the album were not family photographs. They were surveillance photographs. The same format, the same Voss style, the same stamped timestamps in the corners. But they were of Gerald's father. Harold Fitch in a parking lot. Harold Fitch through the window of a diner. Harold Fitch at what appeared to be a job site, in work clothes, carrying a toolbox. Gerald's father had been a maintenance worker. He'd worked overnight shifts, Gerald said, for most of his working life, at a hospital, then at a warehouse, then at a cold storage facility in the 1980s. The cold storage facility was in Ashton, on Route 9. Harold Fitch had been a subject. Gerald is the son of a subject. He is himself a subject, or a candidate for a subject, since he was never employed at this address, only worked nearby. Thomas Wren worked nearby. The woman at Rutgers is nearby, academically connected to a campus 7 miles from Route 9. I don't know what the criteria are, exactly. The letter said, a person of routine, employed in a role that requires nightly presence, with no strong expectation that their ordinary life will be witnessed by others. But the satellite names, Lydia, Gerald, Thomas, the student, don't all fit that profile cleanly. They orbit the address. They came close and moved on. Unless the Voss project isn't just about the watchman. Unless the watchman is the center, and the others are the context. The people who would have seen me if they'd stopped, who passed within a mile of my nights and never knew I was there. The underexposed, illuminated from the edges outward. Part 14. The Ashton County Historical Society. I went on Sunday afternoon while the others were at their respective homes doing their respective cautious things. Lydia offered to come, but I wanted to do this part alone. I don't know why. It felt like something I needed to do in my own company. The Historical Society occupies the ground floor of an old municipal building on Birchwood, half a mile from the Store King facility. It's open Sunday afternoons, staffed by 2 volunteers and a part-time archivist who looked mildly startled to see me, as though visitors were not entirely expected. I asked about Voss and Son document storage on Route 9. I asked about the family. The archivist, a woman named Ruth, in her 70s, who wore her reading glasses on a chain and had the particular confident manner of someone who knows where everything is, looked at me for a moment and then said, "You're the security guard." She'd read the Reddit post. Her granddaughter had shown it to her. She took me to a filing cabinet in the back room and pulled a folder without hesitation, the way you pull something you've pulled before. Inside was a photocopy of a 1953 article from the Ashton Courier. Local business marks 5 years. Voss and Son document storage. Route 9. A photograph of 2 men in front of the building. The same building from the photocopy in the Store King file. Father and son. The caption read, Walter Voss and Rudolf Voss. Walter began it. Rudolf continued. R. Voss. The article described the business as a document storage and archival service catering to local legal and medical practices. Secure. Climate controlled. Professionally managed. The article mentioned that Walter Voss had come to Ashton from Germany in 1938. He had been, before emigrating, a professional photographer. There was a second article, from 1969. Rudolf Voss, sole proprietor following the retirement of Walter Voss, announces expansion of services. A photograph of Rudolf alone, in the same spot in front of the building. Older now. A lean man, spare in the way of people who don't waste anything. A third clipping, not an article but a classified ad from 1984. Voss Document Services, professional archival, secure storage, experienced staff, by appointment only. Route 9, Ashton. No photograph. And then nothing. No further clippings. No further mentions. Ruth said the business had closed sometime in the mid-1980s. As far as she could determine, the building was demolished in 1986. The land sold. The contractor's yard came next. Then the orchard. She had that sequence reversed from the county records I'd found, and I chose to trust the woman with the filing cabinet. I asked if she knew what happened to Rudolf Voss after the business closed. She said she believed he'd continued to live in the area for some time. She believed he had a daughter. She did not know the daughter's name. I asked if she had a photograph of the daughter. She looked at me carefully. Then she opened a second folder in the same cabinet. I had not seen her go to a second folder, and I wondered how long she had been thinking about this, and withdrew a single photograph, a snapshot, color, from what looked like the late 1980s. A backyard birthday party or similar occasion. Several people gathered around a picnic table. Ruth pointed to a woman at the edge of the group, mid-20s, perhaps, dark hair, good posture, looking not at the camera but at something off to the left of the frame, with the focused expression of someone watching something she has decided is worth watching. That's the daughter, Ruth said. Eleanor, I think. Part 15. What I told Detective Cho. I called Cho from the parking lot of the Historical Society. I told her everything Ruth had told me. I told her about Walter Voss coming from Germany in 1938, which had been sitting in my chest like a stone since Ruth said it. A professional photographer, a refugee, a man who came to a new country and built a business storing other people's documents and eventually, or perhaps from the beginning, began building a document of his own. I don't know what Walter Voss saw before he left. I don't know what it meant to him. What it cost him, to live in a country where people could move through their days without anyone noting the fact of their existence. Without record. Without witness. I'm not making an argument for what he did. I am trying to understand it. There's a difference, and it matters to me that the difference exists. Cho listened to all of it. Then she said, the daughter, Eleanor. She'd be in her 60s now. Gray hair, cut short. Good posture. Reminds you of a librarian. Yes, I said. Cho said she would pursue it. She said the photograph from the Historical Society was not sufficient to establish identity. She said the notary at the UPS store might be able to look at the photograph and confirm whether the woman in it was the woman who'd come in to sign the dissolution papers. She said she'd be in touch. I sat in the parking lot for a while. The sun was going down over Route 9. Orange and flat against the corrugated roof lines of the commercial strip. If I drove a half-mile east, I would be at Store King. I would be at the address where a man named Walter had arrived from somewhere that had stopped seeing its people as worth recording, and had spent the rest of his life correcting that, one subject at a time, in a country where nobody was paying attention to a night watchman on an industrial road in central New Jersey. I thought about what it would mean to be the last subject, the one whose crate gets opened, the one who gets to read the letter and understand that it was, all along, a kind of love, intrusive, unasked for, legally indefensible, but a love nonetheless. An insistence that your ordinary life mattered, that the way you tilted your head when you fell asleep in your chair at 3 a.m. was worth preserving. I thought about my son in Portland, about the birth announcement in my mother's hallway, about Karen, who said I never accumulated anything. Then I drove to Store King and did my rounds. Part 16. Sunday night. I want to describe this accurately because I'm aware that at this point in the story my credibility depends on precision, and because what happened Sunday night is the part I keep returning to. It was 3:22 a.m. I had completed my first round and was sitting in the office with my logbook open and my second cup of coffee going cold on the desk. The lot was quiet. No vehicles on Route 9. No movement anywhere on the cameras. Store King has 4 external security cameras, and I had taken to watching the feeds more carefully in the past week. The camera covering row C showed something. I want to be careful. The camera covering row C is mounted at the east end of the row, aimed west, covering the full length of the aisle. At 3:22 a.m., in the top right corner of the feed, which would correspond to the area near the north end of Unit 214, there was a brief light, not the beam of a flashlight, more like the glow of a small screen, a phone screen or a tablet. It lasted approximately 3 seconds, then went dark. I went to row C. The master lock on Unit 214 was in place. I grabbed it and pulled it. Solid. I checked the floor in front of the unit and the door frame and the walls on either side. Nothing disturbed. No footprints in the light grit that accumulates along the base of the building. Nothing I could see, but there was something I could smell. I'm not someone who notices smells easily. My ex-wife used to say I had the olfactory sensitivity of a concrete block, but standing in front of Unit 214 at 3:22 in the morning, I could smell something I recognized and couldn't immediately place. Something faintly chemical and organic at the same time. It took me until I was back at the office, looking at the camera feed again, to identify it. Darkroom chemicals, fixer and stop bath. The smell of someone developing photographs inside a sealed storage unit at 3 a.m. with no light source visible from outside and no indication the lock had been disturbed. I wrote it in the log. I added a note about the light on the camera feed with the timestamp. I went back twice more before the end of my shift. Both times, secure. Both times, that smell fading by the third visit but not entirely gone. Bundle 342 is in progress. I believe that now completely. Part 17. Lydia calls. Lydia called Tuesday morning, 6 days after she'd first reached out to me. It was early, before 7, and I was still in bed at my brother's, which is where I've been sleeping since the photograph showed up at my apartment door. I haven't been back to Birch Street except to collect clothes. I've been telling myself I'll go back when things settle, knowing that things are not going to settle. Not yet. She'd found the 5th name. The student at Rutgers Newark is named Petra Sokolova. She's 29, a doctoral student in archival science, specializing in photographic preservation. She'd come to Lydia's attention through a university department webpage listing graduate researchers, and Lydia had confirmed the connection when she found a paper Petra had written for a seminar, not published. Just a coursework submission that someone had uploaded to a course page that hadn't been properly secured, about documentary ethics in 20th century photographic practice. The paper cited, in its bibliography, a privately held collection, Voss Personal Archive, Ashton, New Jersey, consulted 2023. I read that 3 times. Petra Sokolova had visited the Voss archive. She'd cited it academically in 2023, when Unit 214, was presumably still active, still accumulating bundles, still locked and silent on row C. She had access. She had been given access, or had found access, or had sought access as a researcher and been granted it. I called Lydia back. I asked if she thought Petra knew about the wall, about the names, about us. Lydia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think Petra might be the reason the wall existed. Not to document her, to show her. She's an archivist. She would understand what she was looking at. I thought about the index card. You were always going to open this door. Maybe the card wasn't for me. Maybe it was for whoever came after. For Petra, when she eventually saw the wall. For the 5 of us, when we eventually found each other. Maybe the whole reveal, the missing lock, the crate, the final photograph with the impossible timestamp, was not an accident, not an oversight, not a failure of operational security after 77 years of careful invisibility. Maybe it was, in the precise and patient way of someone who plans across decades, the final document, the documentation of the documentation, the record of us finding the record. Part 18. What Eleanor left. Detective Cho called Friday morning. She'd located Eleanor Voss through the notary identification, The UPS store employee confirmed the Historical Society photograph. From there, a social security number. From there, an address. She was in Ashton. She was 3/4 of a mile from Store King, in a small house on Elm Street, the same street as the UPS store where she'd signed the dissolution papers. She had lived there, as best Cho could determine, for at least 20 years. There was a car registered in her name, a late model Honda, currently parked in the driveway. Cho went to the address on Thursday with a colleague. She knocked. Nobody answered. She left a card. She ran the plate on the Honda, registered to Eleanor Voss. No warrants, no flags. She went back Friday morning. The card she'd left was still on the doorstep, undisturbed. The Honda was still in the driveway. The neighbor to the east, a retired nurse, said she hadn't seen Eleanor in about 2 weeks. She said this was not unusual. Eleanor kept to herself, received few visitors, was quiet and polite and not the kind of person whose absence you'd immediately notice. She said Eleanor had mentioned, sometime in the past month, that she was planning to travel. She hadn't said where. There was no sign of forced entry. There was no sign of distress. Eleanor Voss appears to have locked her house, gotten into her car, or another vehicle, since the Honda remained, and left. She had closed the company. She had finished the archive. She had arranged for me to open the door and for all of us to find each other and for Petra to eventually understand the scope and the history and the strange, patient, unasked for gift of 77 years of witnessing. And then she had gone somewhere that Cho, so far, cannot find. Part 19. What Petra said. We met her on Saturday. All 4 of us, me, Lydia, Gerald, Thomas, and Petra, who drove up from Newark in a car full of research files and sat across from us at the same diner in Cranford and looked at us with the expression of someone who has been waiting to have a particular conversation for some time. She's 29. She speaks with careful precision, the way people do when they've trained themselves to say exactly what they mean. She had a notebook. She took notes throughout, which none of the rest of us found strange, given the circumstances. She told us what she knew. She'd found the Voss archive through a footnote. A colleague of her dissertation advisor had written a monograph on mid-century documentary photography in New Jersey and had mentioned, in a footnote, a privately held collection of vernacular surveillance photography maintained by a family in Ashton. No name, no address, just the footnote. Petra had spent 8 months tracking it to Eleanor. Eleanor had met with her twice. The first meeting was at Eleanor's house on Elm Street, where Eleanor showed her a selection of materials, not the full archive, not the subjects' names, but the historical record, Walter's original cameras, Rudolph's notebooks, the ledgers tracking subjects by number rather than name, the evolution of equipment and technique across 7 decades. Eleanor had been, Petra said, precise and unapologetic and not unkind. The second meeting was in January of this year. Eleanor had called her and asked her to come again. At that meeting, Eleanor told her that the archive would shortly be made accessible. She did not use the word revealed. She said accessible. She said the current subject would reach a natural conclusion point, and that when he did, the documentation would be complete, and she intended the 5 connected individuals to have the opportunity to understand what had been built. Petra had asked why 5. Eleanor had said, because the archive was never only about the subject. The subject was the center. But a center requires a circumference. The people in orbit around the address, the ones who came close and worked nearby and drove past on their way to other things, they were part of the document too. The world the subject moved through without knowing he was being seen. Petra asked Eleanor why she was closing it. After 77 years, after her grandfather and her father and now her. Eleanor was quiet for what Petra described as a long time. Long enough that Petra wondered if she would answer. Then Eleanor said, because I'm the last one, and because I want it understood before I'm gone. My grandfather came from a place where people disappeared without record. He spent his life making sure that couldn't happen here, not to the people in his keeping. But a record kept in secret is only half a record. The other half is being read. She was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's in 2022. Petra told us this carefully, quietly, watching our faces. The disease progresses slowly in some people, she added, as though we had asked. Eleanor had told her this too. We sat with that for a while. The decaf nobody was touching. The notebook. The 5 of us at a laminate table in a diner off the Garden State Parkway, assembled by a woman who was not present, on an errand that had been set in motion before most of us were born. Gerald cleared his throat. He said, she watched my father. Petra nodded. She said, your father was the 3rd subject 1981 to 1993. Gerald said, did she know I was his son? When she put my name on the wall. Petra said, yes. Gerald looked down at his untouched coffee. Then he looked up and he wasn't, I think, going to cry, but he was somewhere adjacent to it, he said. She kept his whole life in boxes, somewhere. His ordinary life. She kept it. Yes, Petra said again. All of it. Epilogue. Monday morning. I'm writing this from the office at Store King at 4:47 a.m. First round is done. Second round in 40 minutes. The lot is quiet. The camera feeds show nothing on row C. I called my son last night. We talked for an hour and 20 minutes. Which is longer than we've talked on the phone in years. He asked if I was going to leave the job. I said no. He asked if I was scared. I said I didn't think scared was the right word. He asked what the right word was. I thought about it and said I thought the right word was located. I know where I am. I know what this place is. For the first time in 3 years of nights I have a full sense of the address I'm occupying and what it has meant. For 77 years. To stand here in the dark and pay attention. There is a woman named Eleanor Voss who is somewhere we haven't found her, living with an illness that will eventually take what it takes. And she spent the last 2 years of her company's life making sure that the 5 of us would find each other and find Petra and understand the archive before the archive became inaccessible. She did not ask our permission. She spent years of our lives treating us as subjects in a project we had not agreed to. She was not wrong to do this. She was not right to do it. Both of those things are true and neither cancels the other. Petra is writing something. She hasn't told us what. Exactly. She says she wants to do it carefully. Gerald has asked to see the photographs of his father, whenever the archive becomes formally accessible, which Cho says will depend on the resolution of the legal questions, which will take time. Thomas went back to Montclair and called his son in Arizona and apparently had a version of the same phone call I had with Marcus. Lydia went home to Maplewood and she texted me, made a point of going to her usual coffee shop on Baker Street on Saturday morning, sitting at her usual table, and staying for an extra hour. Being seen, she said. Practicing it. I have been going back to my apartment on Birch Street in stages. Half my things are at my brother's and half are on Birch Street and I move between them in a pattern that I recognize, with some wry feeling, as exactly the kind of observable routine that would make me a legible subject. Whoever is currently watching me, whoever began bundle 342, knows my route between the 2 addresses by now, knows the way I stop for coffee at the gas station on 35, knows which light I let turn red before I decide to go through it. I find I don't mind. The lot is quiet. Route 9 is empty in both directions. In 40 minutes I will stand up from this chair and walk row A, then B, then C. I will reach unit 214. I will grab the lock. I will pull it, and it will hold, and I will write in my log, unit 214, secure. And somewhere in this building, in the dark between the ceiling tiles or behind a door frame or in the particular shadow at the end of row C where the overhead light doesn't quite reach, something small and rectangular and patient will record the fact of me doing it. It's been 22 days since the first post. In that time I have received 4,400 private messages, been contacted by 2 journalists, 1 documentary filmmaker, and a professor of sociology at Montclair State University who wants to write a paper about what she's calling custodial surveillance as affective labor. I have not responded to most of these. I have responded to Cho, to Lydia, to Gerald, to Thomas, and most recently to Petra, whose situation has changed in a way I'll get to. I want to be precise about what has happened, because there's a lot of noise in the comments of the first post and I've seen some of it calcify into assumptions that aren't accurate. People keep asking if I'm in danger. I don't think I'm in danger. People keep saying Eleanor Voss is a monster. I don't think she's a monster. People keep saying I should quit the job and move away. I am not going to quit the job and move away. What I am going to do is tell you what's happened, in order, because that's what I do. Part 21. Rudolph's Notebooks. Petra called me on a Tuesday, 12 days after the first post. She was at the Rutgers Newark Library and she had her careful voice on, the one she uses when she's about to tell you something that requires you to sit down. She'd been back to Eleanor's house on Elm Street, not to knock. She'd already tried that twice without result. Same as Cho. She'd gone because the neighbor to the east, the retired nurse, had called Petra's cell phone number. I don't know how the neighbor got Petra's number. Petra didn't fully explain and I didn't push. The neighbor's name is Constance. She's 73, a retired ER nurse from Newark who has lived next to Eleanor Voss for 19 years. She called Petra because, she said, 2 weeks before Eleanor disappeared, Eleanor had asked her a favor. She'd asked Constance to hold on to a package, not to open it, not to mail it, just to hold it. She said someone would come to collect it within the month. She said the person who came would be younger, would be a researcher, would be coming from a university. She said Constance would know her because she would ask about the notebooks. Petra asked about the notebooks. Constance went inside and came back with a box. Flat rate priority mail box. Take shot. Addressed in Eleanor's handwriting to Petra Sokolova at her Rutgers department address. But never mailed. Just held. The way Eleanor had asked. Inside the box were 3 composition notebooks. The old-fashioned kind with black and white marbled covers, and a sealed envelope addressed only to the 5. I'm going to describe the notebooks and then I'm going to type out the letter, and I want to be clear that Petra has read everything and agreed to share it here, and that Gerald and Lydia and Thomas have all read it, and that what it contains changes some of what I thought I understood about the project. Part 22. What the notebooks contained. The 3 notebooks were Rudolph's, R. Voss, Eleanor's father, the man who wrote the 1974 letter I reproduced in the first post. They cover the period from approximately 1965 to 1989, though the entries are not dated consistently. Rudolph appears to have written in them the way some people keep journals, in long bursts after months of silence, filling 10 pages in a night and then nothing for half a year. Petra read all 3. She took careful notes. She shared her notes with me by email, 8 pages single-spaced. And I've been sitting with them for 10 days. I want to share the parts that bear directly on what we've been trying to understand. The first notebook begins in 1965, which means it picks up 17 years after Walter began the project. Rudolph doesn't explain the project's origins in the first notebook the way you'd explain something new. He writes about it the way you write about the weather, as context, as background, as a thing that simply is. He writes about his father, Walter, with a precision that reads more like documentation than memoir. Father came to this country with 2 cameras and 47 photographs. The photographs were of his family. He told me once that he carried them because he was afraid, not of the journey, not of the new country, but of forgetting. He had seen what happened when the record was interrupted. He knew what it meant when the record was held by people who had decided who deserved one and who did not. He said, the only defense against that is to be your own archivist, to insist on documentation without permission. And later, in the same early entry, I used to argue with him about it. I thought it was intrusion. He said it wasn't intrusion, it was insistence. He said the subject doesn't need to consent to being seen any more than a tree needs to consent to being photographed. The photograph is an argument that the thing exists. It was here. It was real. That argument is always worth making. Rudolph clearly wrestled with this. The second notebook, which covers roughly the late 1970s, contains long passages that read like a private debate, him arguing both sides, sometimes within the same paragraph. One entry reads, the subject is a man named Carey. I will not write his full name here. He has worked the address for 6 years. He does not know I exist. He will never know. I watch him do his work and I think, he is a good man. He is careful. He keeps things that belong to other people safe, and no one notices that he does this, because noticing would require paying attention, and attention is scarce and goes where it is told to go. It does not go to Carey. I am the only thing that goes to Carey. Is this right? I don't know. I know it is not nothing. I know that when Carey retires from this project, the crate will contain 3,000 photographs of a man who existed completely, whose Tuesday was witnessed. I know that witnessed is the word I mean. The third notebook, which covers the late 1980s, is where Rudolph writes about Eleanor for the first time. She was a teenager when the earlier notebooks were written. By the late 1980s she was in her mid-20s and, it's clear from context, she had been brought into the project. There's one entry that I keep returning to, not because it's dramatic, it isn't, but because it explains something I couldn't explain before. Eleanor asked me today why we don't simply tell them. She means the subjects. She means, why not knock on the door and say, I have been watching you. I have kept a record of your life. I have given you permanence. She is young enough to think that honesty is always the more ethical path. I told her what father told me. The observation changes when the subject knows they are observed. Not because the subject becomes dishonest. Most people are honest most of the time. But because they become performative. They stop simply being and begin being for the camera. The record becomes a performance rather than a document. And a performance, however sincere, is not the same as a life, she said. But at the end, when the archive is complete, could we tell them at the end? I told her I didn't know. I told her it was worth thinking about. She is already a better archivist than I am. She thinks about the ethics before the aesthetics. I was always more interested in the frame. The final entry in the third notebook is undated. The handwriting is shakier than in the earlier entries. Rudolph had a degenerative joint disease that affected his hands in his later years, Petra says. Based on other records, the entry reads, I am giving this to Eleanor. The cameras, The ledgers. The method. The current subject is named Fitch. Harold Fitch. He is a good man. He will be the last one I document. I think. My hands are not what they were. Eleanor will find the next subject when it is time. She will do it better than I did. She always does things better than I did. The project is not finished. The project is not the kind of thing that finishes. But my part of it is, I think, nearly done. I have been watching Ordinary Lives for 40 years and I have not stopped believing it was worth it. I think that is the important thing. I have not stopped believing. Neither has she. Part 23. The letter to the five. The envelope was sealed with wax. Red wax. Pressed with what looked like a thumb rather than a seal. Petra opened it carefully. Photographed the seal before breaking it. Documented the chain of custody the way she documents everything. Then she read it and called me. I'm going to type it out in full. It's 3 pages in Eleanor's handwriting, which is different from Rudolph's. Smaller, more angular. The handwriting of someone who processes thought through the act of writing rather than despite it. To the 5 of you, if you are reading this, then Dale has opened the door, and you have found each other. And Petra has done what I asked her to do. I want to start by saying that I understand this is strange. I understand that you didn't ask for any of this and that some of you are frightened and some of you are angry and all of that is correct and appropriate. You don't owe me equanimity. You don't owe me understanding. I only ask that you read this before you decide what you think. My grandfather Walter came to New Jersey from Leipzig in 1938. He was 31 years old. He left behind his mother, his 2 sisters, his brother-in-law, and his niece, who was 4. He left because he saw what was coming and he was afraid. His family did not leave because they believed it would not be as bad as he feared. They were wrong. Walter spent the rest of his life trying to answer a question he couldn't quite articulate. He said it to my father once, when my father was still a boy. The question was not how people disappear. He understood the mechanics of that. The question was how it becomes possible to make a people disappear. How you get there. What has to happen, before the end, to make the end possible. His answer, after a lifetime of thinking about it, was this: you make them invisible first. You stop seeing them. You remove them from the record, from newspapers, from photographs, from the ordinary accumulation of documentation that says, this person exists, this person's Tuesday happened, this person was here. Once they are invisible, the rest follows. The record is not a bureaucratic convenience. The record is the argument that someone is real. He started the project in 1948. The first subject was a night watchman named Okoye who had worked the address, then our family's document storage building, for 9 years. My grandfather chose him for the reasons my father later described in his letter: a man of routine, of nighttime presence, of profound invisibility to the world around him. He photographed Okoye for 4 years, until Okoye retired and moved to Virginia to be near his daughter. I want to be clear about something. My grandfather was not a saint. What he did was not legal. What my father did was not legal. What I have done is not legal. We observed you without your consent. We kept files on you. We documented your lives in detail that you never agreed to and that you might, if you had been asked, have refused. I am not asking you to forgive this. I am asking you to understand that it was not done from malice, or prurience, or the desire for power over you. It was done from the belief, which I hold as completely as I hold any belief, that ordinary lives are worth witnessing. That the Tuesday of a man named Dale Pruitt, or a woman named Lydia Marsh, or a retired electrician named Thomas Wren, is not less worthy of documentation than the life of anyone whose name appears in a newspaper. You were chosen because you were near this address, because you had the qualities my grandfather identified, the qualities of people whose lives are lived below the threshold of public notice. You were chosen because someone decided, 77 years ago, that the people below that threshold deserve a witness. I chose to end the project for several reasons. My health is one. The law has changed in ways that make continuation increasingly difficult, and I am too old to adapt. But the primary reason is that the project was always meant to end with disclosure. My grandfather imagined it, my father developed the idea, and I have spent 30 years working out how to do it without simply destroying what we built. The archive is complete. Every photograph, every bundle, every subject, numbered and documented. 4 subjects before Dale: Okoye, a man named Sanderson, Harold Fitch, and a woman named Park who worked the address for 8 years in the 1990s. Dale is the 5th, and he is, I hope he will forgive me for saying this, the best of us, the most fully himself, on every night, in every frame, the most consistently present in his own life. The archive will be donated to Rutgers Newark. Petra has agreed to serve as its curator. The donation is contingent on the legal questions being resolved, which I am told will take time. Joe will know what to do. To each of you specifically. To Dale, I am sorry about the photograph at your apartment door. That was not me. That was a mistake made by someone I trusted and no longer do. You were never supposed to feel threatened. The project was never about making you feel watched. It was about the opposite. To Lydia, the library card on the wall was your mother's, not yours. She worked in Ashton for 2 years in the 1980s. You inherited more from her than you know. To Gerald, your father's archive is in a separate storage location. Address enclosed on the smaller slip of paper inside this envelope. It belongs to you. There are 2,847 photographs. He was a good subject, which is to say he was an honest man. To Thomas, you were almost a subject. You had all the qualities. You came as close as anyone who was not chosen. I watched you for 4 months and concluded that your life was already sufficiently witnessed. You had people who paid attention to you. The chosen subjects have, in common, a certain solitude. You were not solitary enough. I mean that as a compliment. To Petra, you know what to do. You always did. That's why I called you. The address at the bottom of this letter is where I am going. It is not a secret. I am not hiding. I am tired and I am sick and I am going somewhere quiet to finish in my own way, on my own terms, without reporters or police or the particular texture of being discovered. I have spent my life watching other people live. I would like to live the end of mine in private. I ask only that you give me until the end of the summer before you share that address. By then, it won't matter. Thank you for reading this. Thank you for being worth watching. Eleanor Voss. April 2025. Petra read me the letter over the phone. It took 40 minutes because she had to stop twice and I had to stop once. I'm not going to say more about that. Cho has seen the letter. She's seen the address at the bottom. She's made some calls. She's respecting Eleanor's request. For now. Because there's no law that requires her not to. The small slip of paper inside the envelope contained a storage unit address in Clifton, New Jersey. Gerald drove there the day after Petra shared the letter. He called me from the parking lot. He said, "It's a regular place. Not like Store King. Just a regular storage place." He said, "The lock combination was my father's birthday." He said, "I'm going to go in now." He called me back 2 hours later. He'd been sitting inside the unit for most of that time, going through the bundles. He didn't describe what was in them in detail. He said, he was a good man. She was right. He really was. Part 24. What I found on my own camera feeds. I want to be precise about this because I know how it sounds. Store King has 4 external security cameras. I've mentioned this. They cover the parking lot, the north entrance, the south entrance, and the exterior of row C. They record to a server in the back office that stores 30 days of footage before overriding. I have been watching the row C feed more carefully than usual since the first post. Every morning before I leave, I pull up the footage from my overnight shift and scan through it. I found something in the footage from 3 nights ago at 2:14 a.m. And yes, I understand the significance of that time. Yes, I've thought about whether it's a coincidence and concluded that it is probably not. The row C camera captured what appears to be a brief, diffuse illumination from the direction of Unit 214. Not a flashlight beam. Not a screen glow like the one I reported earlier. More like the unit's interior light bleeding under the door, as if the fluorescent tube inside had been switched on for approximately 8 seconds and then switched off. The master lock on Unit 214 is in place. I check it at the start and end of every round and I've been checking it additionally at 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. each night for the past 3 weeks. It has not been disturbed. I told Cho. She came out the next morning and looked at the footage. She looked at the unit. She looked at the lock. She didn't say anything dismissive, which is one of the things I've come to appreciate about her. She said she'd look into whether any maintenance access had been scheduled for that unit. She said she'd get back to me. She called this morning. No maintenance access had been scheduled. No entry had been recorded in the Store King system. The unit's rental file, still under R. Voss, still renewed with a January money order, showed no activity. She asked me, carefully, if I wanted to open the unit again. I said I'd think about it. I'm still thinking about it. Part 25. Petra's discovery about Walter. Petra is the most methodical person I've encountered in my 51 years, and I worked 12 years in warehouse logistics, which selects for methodical people. She processes information the way a good filing system processes paper. Nothing gets lost. Everything gets labeled. And when you need to find something, it is exactly where it should be. She called me on a Wednesday evening, 3.5 weeks into all of this, and said she'd found something in the historical record that she wanted to tell me about in person. I drove down to Newark on Friday. We met at her office in the university library, which smells like old paper and the particular industrial cleaning fluid that universities have used since the 1970s. And she spread several documents across her desk and talked me through them for 2 hours. Walter Voss had been, before emigrating, not merely a photographer. He had been a documentarian in the specific sense, a man employed by a Jewish cultural organization in Leipzig to photograph community life, synagogues, schools, markets, family gatherings, ordinary days. His job was the record. He was paid, for several years in the early and mid-negative 1930s, to ensure that the ordinary life of his community was witnessed. Petra had found this through the archives of the organization itself, which survived the war in fragmented form and were eventually digitized and held by a university in Israel. Walter's name appeared in payroll records from 1931 to 1936. Beneath his name, in the column where the records described the nature of each employee's work, was a phrase in German that Petra translated for me. Zeuge des Alltags, witness of the ordinary. When Walter came to New Jersey in 1938, he brought that job with him. He had no employer and no organization. He had no one to pay him and no community that knew what he was doing. He had 2 cameras and 47 photographs of people who were, by then, mostly gone. He built the document storage business. He housed other people's records in a building on Route 9 and kept them safe. And in the evenings and on weekends he kept a different kind of record. One man, doing in private, in a country that didn't need it and would never know, the work he'd been trained to do in a country that had needed it desperately and had refused it. Petra said something when she finished laying all this out. She said, "The thing about the project that I couldn't reconcile, at first, was the secrecy. If the point was witnessing, why not be open about it? Why not be like a street photographer? Someone who shoots in public. The law allows that." I said I thought Rudolph had answered that in his notebooks. "The observation changes the subject," she said. "That's part of it. But I think there's another part. I think Walter was doing what his organization had done, building a record of people who would not, if asked, believe they needed one. Because the people who need a record most are always the ones who are most convinced they don't. The people who are below the threshold of public attention don't think of themselves as being in danger of disappearing. They think they're just living. And they are. But Walter knew what living below the threshold actually means, because he'd seen the alternative. I sat with that for a while. Then I said, he couldn't save his family, so he saved everybody's Tuesday. Petra looked at me. She said, "That's going in the paper." Part 26. The interview I didn't give. One of the 2 journalists who contacted me was from a national publication I'm not going to name. She was polite and persistent and had done her research. She'd spoken to the Ashton County Historical Society, to the county records office, to at least 2 people in the comments of my original post who had offered background information they shouldn't have had. We spoke on the phone for about 20 minutes. I told her I wasn't doing interviews. She asked why. I told her it wasn't my story to give. She asked whose story it was. I thought about it for a moment, in the way I'm learning to think about things before I say them, which is something I apparently needed to learn at age 51. Then I said, "It's Okoy's story. It's Sanderson's story. It's Harold Fitch's story and Park's story and mine. It's 5 Watchmen and whatever we add up to. And until we figure out what that is, I don't think any of us should be handing pieces of it to other people." She asked if I thought the story would ever be told publicly. I said yes. I said Petra was writing it. I said when Petra was done, it would be worth reading. The journalist filed something anyway. I've been told it ran in an online section, shorter than she'd intended. I haven't read it. The others have, and they said it was fair but missed the point. I'm not surprised. The point is not easy to hit from the outside. Part 27. Gerald's question. Gerald came to Store King for the first time last Saturday night. He called ahead and asked if I minded company on the overnight, and I said I didn't. He arrived at 10 p.m. with a thermos of decent coffee and a practiced air of someone who has decided to do a thing and is doing it. We did the first round together. I showed him the route, row A through F, the grab and pull at each padlock, the log entry at each checkpoint. He was quiet and attentive in the way of a man who spent 40 years doing careful work. When we reached row C and unit 214, he stopped the way I stop now, a beat longer than necessary. Then he gave the lock a pull. "Secure," he said. "Secure." I agreed. We finished the round and went back to the office and drank the decent coffee, which was an improvement over my usual. Around midnight he said he'd been thinking about something and wanted to ask me directly. He said, "Do you think they're still in there? The cameras? Inside the units? In the ceiling? Wherever they are?" I told him I thought it was possible. I told him about the light at 2:14 a.m. He said, "So someone is still running the project." I said, "Or Eleanor set it to run automatically somehow. Or it's something mechanical and unrelated and I'm reading into it." He said, "But you don't think it's unrelated?" I said no. I didn't think it was unrelated. He was quiet for a minute. Then he said, if they're still running it. After Eleanor dissolved the company and wrote the letter. If someone is still watching you. He paused. Is that the person who put the photograph at your apartment door? The one Eleanor apologized for? Someone she trusted and no longer does. I said I'd thought about that. I said I didn't have an answer. He said, someone learned the project from Eleanor. Someone she taught, or trusted enough to involve. And when she closed it down, they didn't stop. I looked at the camera feeds on the office monitor. Row C, empty and gray in the night vision footage. The door of Unit 214, closed and padlocked and still. Gerald said, she said she was sorry about the photograph. Not sorry it happened. Sorry it was done. That's a different thing. That's someone else's action, not hers. I hadn't thought about that distinction until he made it. I've thought about it every night since. Part 28. What Lydia found in the library. Lydia called on a Thursday. 5 weeks in. She was at the Maplewood Library branch. Her library, the one that appears in her own surveillance photographs. And she'd been doing what she described as archival research, which I understood to mean she'd gone looking for something specific and found it. The Maplewood Library has a local history section. New Jersey regional history, town records, that kind of thing. Lydia had requested access to a box of papers donated to the library in 2019 by the estate of a deceased Maplewood resident. The resident's name was Margaret Okoye. She was the daughter of a man named James Okoye who had moved to New Jersey from Virginia in the early 1940s and worked at a document storage facility on Route 9 in Ashton. Eleanor's letter named the first subject as Okoye. Walter's first subject 1948 to 1952. Margaret Okoye had donated her father's papers when she died. Among them, Lydia found a manila envelope that had never been opened, still sealed, slightly yellowed, with a name and address written on the front in handwriting that Lydia photographed and texted to me, and which I recognized immediately from the 1974 letter. Rudolph Voss's handwriting, the deliberate, old-fashioned precision of it. The envelope was addressed to James Okoye, care of Margaret Okoye at an address in Maplewood. It had been mailed, based on the postmark, barely legible, but Lydia photographed it at high resolution and we were able to make it out. In 1997, James Okoye died in 1994. The envelope had been forwarded to his daughter, who had apparently never opened it, and had eventually ended up in the donated papers. Lydia opened it with library gloves on and documented everything. Inside was a bundle of photographs, 43 of them, held together with a rubber band, each one stamped in the lower right corner with a timestamp from 1948 to 1952. A man, African American, middle-aged, in work clothes, at a building Lydia identified, from the signage visible in several photographs, as the original Voss & Son document storage on Route 9 in Ashton, doing his rounds, checking locks, eating a sandwich in what appeared to be a break room, sleeping in a chair with his chin on his chest and his hands folded in his lap. The way people sleep when they've learned to sleep anywhere. Just him, existing, being witnessed. There was a single index card in the envelope, in Rudolph's handwriting. These belong to you. We kept them safe. RV. He'd been trying to give it back. For 40 years, he'd been trying to return the record to the people it belonged to, and the letters kept arriving too late or to the wrong address or to daughters who didn't know to open them. Lydia said, I think Eleanor had the same idea. I think that's what the wall was. And the letter. The whole reveal. She was trying to give it back. I said, she gave my own life back to me and I didn't know I'd lost it. Lydia said, that's going in Petra's paper too. Probably. I said probably. Part 29. The name on the lease. Detective Cho called on a Monday morning, 5 weeks and 2 days after the first post. She had what she described as an interesting development, which from Cho means something specific. Something that complicates rather than resolves. She'd been in contact with the Hackensack mail forwarding service, the one that held the P.O. box for Voss documentation services. Standard investigative work. She'd subpoenaed the records for what had been received at and sent from that box over the past 3 years. The forwarding service had complied. Most of it was routine. The money orders for Store King's Unit 214. Some business correspondence related to the LLC's operations, a few addressed to a legal name that resolved to Castellan Administrative Services in Wilmington. Standard archival business maintenance. But there was a second name associated with the box. A secondary account holder added in 2019. The name on the secondary account was not a Voss. The name was Dale Pruitt. Cho let that sit for a moment before she kept going. She said, there's no indication you knew about this. Based on everything, The most reasonable interpretation is that Eleanor added your name to the account as part of the end-stage planning, giving you nominal administrative access so that the transfer of materials would be legally cleaner when the time came. I said, but I never agreed to that. She said, no, she didn't ask. I thought about this for a long time. I'm still thinking about it. Eleanor added my name to a business account without my knowledge, without my consent, in preparation for handing me a life's worth of my own documentation. She made me, technically, a co-custodian of my own surveillance record before I knew the surveillance record existed. It's the most vast thing imaginable. The most precisely, specifically vast thing. She gave me the record before she gave me the record. Cho said she didn't think it created any legal exposure for me. She said the more interesting question, legally, was the name that had been on the account before Eleanor added mine, the original secondary account holder. From when the box was first established in 2004. I asked whose name it was. She said, R. Voss. I said, that's Rudolph, Eleanor's father. She said, Rudolph Voss died in 2001. I sat with that. She said, the account with his name was opened in 2004, 3 years after his death. Eleanor opened it. She put his name on it. She opened a business in her dead father's name and ran it for 20 years. She and whoever she trusted, maintaining the project he'd inherited from his father. Continuing the work of a man who'd been trying since 1948 to answer a question he couldn't quite articulate. Cho said, I'm telling you this because you're a secondary account holder and I think you have a right to know. I'm also telling you because I want you to understand the full picture of what you're dealing with. I thanked her. She said she'd be in touch. I went and did my rounds. Part 30. The third meeting. All 5. Petra arranged it. She booked a private room at a restaurant in Cranford. Not the diner this time. Somewhere quieter, with walls that absorbed sound instead of reflecting it. For a Saturday evening 6 weeks into all of this, all 5 of us, for the first time, me and Lydia and Gerald and Thomas and Petra, plus one additional person, whom Petra had brought with her permission and ours, Constance, the retired nurse who had lived next to Eleanor for 19 years and who was, it turned out, less incidental to all of this than we'd understood. Constance is 73 and speaks the way ER nurses speak, directly, efficiently, with a low tolerance for imprecision. She sat next to Petra and drank hot tea and told us what she knew about Eleanor. Eleanor had moved to Elm Street in 2006. At that point she was already running the project alone. Rudolph had been gone 5 years, and she'd taken over fully. She worked from home, doing what Constance understood to be some kind of archival consulting, which was close enough to the truth that Eleanor apparently felt comfortable with the description. She was a good neighbor, quiet. She maintained her property. She brought Constance soup twice when Constance was ill. She had, as far as Constance knew, no close friends in Ashton, no family nearby, no social life to speak of. She left on Sunday mornings for what Constance assumed were church services but which Constance now suspected were something else, given the direction she drove. Constance said, she drove past the Store King facility every Sunday morning. I saw her once, years ago, when I happened to be out early. She drove by slowly, just slowly enough, checking on the address, checking on the project. Sunday morning rounds, the way I did mine every night. I asked Constance if she knew who Eleanor had trusted and then stopped trusting. The person who had put the photograph at my apartment door. Constance was quiet for a moment. Then she said, there was a young man. She mentioned him occasionally. She called him her assistant. I thought he was a student she'd taken on, a research assistant. He came to the house a few times. I saw him maybe 3 or 4 times over the past 2 years. Young, early 30s, maybe. Very serious, very focused. She seemed to trust him completely. And then about 6 months ago she didn't mention him anymore. She paused. And then the dissolution. And then she left. 6 months ago. The dissolution was in February. 6 months before February is August. Last August, something happened between Eleanor and her assistant that made her close the company and send the letter and leave. Petra said she had a theory and asked if she could share it. We said yes. Petra said, Eleanor's letter apologizes for the photograph at Dale's apartment. She says it wasn't her. It was someone she trusted and no longer does. The photograph was taken at 2:14 a.m. while Dale was at work, framed to look like it was taken inside Unit 214. It was designed to frighten him, to make him feel surveilled in the way that is threatening rather than witnessing. She paused. Eleanor spent 70 years. Her family spent 77 years. Building a project designed to witness without threatening, to document without power. The photograph at the apartment was the opposite. It was surveillance as coercion. Someone took the project and used it as a tool of intimidation. Thomas said. The assistant. Petra said. I think so. I think Eleanor taught him the project and he understood the mechanics without understanding the ethics. And when she realized what he'd done, she understood the project had been compromised. She couldn't continue it, so she ended it, Gerald said. And he's still watching. The room was quiet, I said. The light at 2:14. The smell of darkroom chemicals, Petra said. He knows the address. He knows the method. He knows bundle 342 was supposed to begin. And Eleanor isn't there to stop him. Part 31. What I found in the ceiling. I want to be clear about the sequence of events here because the sequence matters. On Thursday morning, 4 days after the meeting in Cranford, I completed my overnight shift and did not go home. Instead, I waited for Pete to arrive, asked him to cover the desk for an hour, and borrowed the facility's 6-foot stepladder. I went to row C. I went to Unit 214. I stood in front of the closed, padlocked door for a long moment, the way I always do now, and then I went to the Unit 2 doors down. Unit 212. Currently vacant. Access available to facility staff for maintenance purposes. I opened Unit 212 and set up the ladder directly inside the door. I pushed up the drop ceiling tile in the corner that shared a wall with Unit 214. I shone my flashlight into the gap in the ceiling space, tucked against the cinder block dividing wall between 212 and 214, was a small camera, digital, roughly the size of a deck of cards, mounted on a flexible arm that had been secured to the wall with epoxy. The camera's lens pointed through a gap in the drop ceiling tile on the Unit 214 side, a gap that had been cut, or worn, to approximately the width of 2 fingers. From inside Unit 214, the ceiling looked normal. The tile was intact. There was nothing visible. The camera had a small indicator light that should have been green if it was recording and dark if it was off. The indicator light was dark. I photographed everything from several angles. I called Cho. I left the camera in place because Cho said to leave it in place. Cho came out within the hour. She examined the camera without touching it. She called in someone from what I understood to be a digital forensics unit. The forensics technician arrived in the early afternoon and spent 2 hours on the ceiling access. He said the camera was a commercially available model, nothing specialized, available online for about $80. It was connected to a small wireless transmitter that was piggybacking on Store King's guest Wi-Fi network, the network that's available in the office for tenants who want to check on their units remotely. The camera had been transmitting footage to an IP address that the technician traced to a VPN service registered in Romania. It had been active until approximately 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago was when Eleanor left. The transmissions had stopped when she left. The camera was still there, still mounted, still connected, but dormant. Whatever was receiving the signal had stopped receiving it. The 2:14 a.m. light I'd seen on the row C feed. The smell of darkroom chemicals. Those had happened after the camera went dormant. Something had been in that unit, physically present, after Eleanor left and before or after the transmission stopped. Cho said. 2 possibilities. Eleanor stopped the feed when she left. She has the credentials. She could have shut it down remotely. Or the assistant shut it down when he realized we were looking. I said. Or Eleanor shut it down and the assistant has been coming in person since then to continue the documentation the old-fashioned way. The way Walter did it, Cho said. With a darkroom. I said. Inside the unit. She looked at the ceiling of Unit 212 for a long moment. Then she said, I'm going to get a warrant. Part 32. The warrant and what it found. The warrant took 4 days. Cho executed it on a Tuesday morning, and she called me afterward rather than before, which I understood. I'm not law enforcement. I'm a witness. And she had done me the courtesy of keeping me as informed as the law allowed throughout this process without giving me the opportunity to be present for anything that might complicate her case. She opened Unit 214. Inside, the drop ceiling had been modified. 3 of the tiles in the back half of the unit had been removed and replaced with a false ceiling of thin plywood, painted the same off-white as the original tiles and, at casual inspection, indistinguishable from them. The space above the false ceiling, the gap between the plywood and the actual ceiling, roughly 18 inches, had been fitted with a red sapphire, a small and larger, and a set of chemical trays secured to a plywood shelf, a portable water supply, a 5-gallon camping jug with a hand pump, positioned over a collection tray, boxes of photographic paper, 2 35mm cameras, 1 digital camera, a collection of lenses in a padded case, a working darkroom in the ceiling of a storage unit, operational for what the forensics technician estimated, based on the condition of the chemicals and the quantity of paper remaining in the boxes, to be at least the past year. The cameras were not there. The film was not there. The developed photographs, if any, were not there. But in one of the chemical trays, in the stop bath, Still wet. A strip of developed negatives. 8 frames 35mm black and white. Cho had them printed before she called me. The prints show the Store King parking lot at night. The north entrance. Row C from outside. Looking toward the building. Unit 214's door. Closed and padlocked. And the final 2 frames. The office window at Store King. Illuminated from inside. A man at the desk. Visible through the glass. Writing in a logbook. Me. Last Tuesday night. 3 a.m. Roughly. Based on the angle of the office clock visible in the background of one frame. He was still here. He'd been in the ceiling when I was doing my rounds below. He'd been watching me watching for him. Cho has the negatives. Cho has everything. She's pursuing the assistant as an active investigation, which I'm not going to detail beyond what I've shared because she's asked me not to, and I trust her. What I will say is this. The assistant was in that ceiling, and at some point between Eleanor leaving and Cho executing the warrant, he was in that ceiling while I was in that building, while I was grabbing padlocks and writing entries and drinking bad coffee and being, in my consistent and thoroughly ordinary way, a subject. I don't know how to feel about that. I've been working on it. Part 33. Marcus comes to Ashton. My son flew in from Portland on a Thursday. He didn't call ahead. He texted me from the airport that he'd booked a last-minute ticket and asked if I had a couch. I told him I had a couch and also a bed and also 3 weeks of things I needed to tell him in person. He's 27 and he looks like me around the eyes and like his mother everywhere else, which is a fortunate arrangement. He drove a rental car to my brother's place in Toms River, where I was still staying, and we sat at the kitchen table for 4 hours while I told him everything from the beginning, in order. The way I've been trying to tell it here. He's a project manager for a software company. He is used to receiving large quantities of information and identifying the critical path. Halfway through, he started taking notes on his phone. By the end, he had a list of questions. He asked the assistant, "Do you think he picked up the project because he believed in it, or because he wanted something?" I said I thought Eleanor had believed he believed in it. I thought the photograph at my apartment door had proved otherwise. He asked, "What's the difference between the photograph Eleanor sent, the one from bundle 341, the one that ended up in your pocket, and the photograph at your apartment? They both used your image without your consent." This is a harder question than it looks. I've thought about it for 3 weeks. The photograph from bundle 341 was documentation. It recorded a fact, that I was standing in a doorway, without distortion or threat. It was placed where I would find it, by someone who intended me to understand what I was looking at and why. The photograph was a gift, or at least was intended as one. Here is a moment from your life. It existed. The photograph at my apartment was mimicry. It was designed to look like the bundle 341 photograph but to feel like a threat. It was placed not to give me something but to take something. My sense of safety in my own home. The form was the same. The intent was opposite. Marcus said. So the line isn't whether you consent. The line is whether the intent is to document or to frighten. I said. That's what Eleanor tried to maintain for 77 years. That's what her assistant broke. He thought about that. Then he said, "Can I come see the unit?" We went to Store King on Friday afternoon, when Pete was on the day shift. Pete knew Marcus. I'd mentioned him once or twice over the years the way you mention your children to people you work alongside, without ceremony or detail. Pete shook his hand and went back to whatever Pete does during the day, which I suspect involves a lot of crossword puzzles. I took Marcus to row C. I showed him the route. I explained the grab and pull, the log entry, the 2 seconds per unit. When we reached unit 214, I stopped. He stopped beside me. The master lock was in place. Cho had reinstated it after the warrant. The unit was sealed and quiet and smelled, faintly, of the particular must of a space that has been opened and closed repeatedly and never properly ventilated. Marcus looked at the door for a long time. Then he said, "Someone watched you walk past this door every night for 3 years." I said, "Yes." He said, "And you had no idea?" I said, "None." He said, "But you kept coming back. You kept doing the rounds." I said, "That's the job." He said, "No, I mean, before you knew, when it was just a job, you were still showing up every night, being exactly who you are, in exactly this place." Someone decided that was worth recording, and I think they were right. I didn't say anything. I grabbed the lock and gave it a pull. Secure. Part 34. What I know about the previous subjects. Petra sent me her preliminary research notes on a Sunday. 12 pages. I've read them several times. The 5 subjects, in order. James Okoye, born 1901 in Georgia. Moved north in the late 1930s. Worked at Voss & Son Document Storage from 1942 to 1955 as a general maintenance worker and overnight security presence. Walter began documenting him in 1948 and continued until Okoye retired in 1952. The archive for Okoye, Petra estimates based on Eleanor's inventories, contains approximately 1,800 photographs. Okoye moved to Virginia in 1952. He died in 1994. His daughter Margaret donated his papers, including the unopened letter from Rudolph, to the Maplewood Library in 2019. Arthur Sanderson, born 1919 in Pennsylvania, worked at Voss & Son and then at Greenway Storage, which occupied the same address from 1956 to 1978. As a night watchman, Rudolph began documenting him in approximately 1956, continuing after his father retired from the active project in the early 1960s. The archive for Sanderson contains approximately 3,200 photographs. Sanderson died in 1981. Petra has been unable to locate surviving family. Harold Fitch, born 1932 in Newark, worked at the Route 9 address, then Greenway, from 1981 to 1993 in a maintenance and security role. Gerald's father. The archive for Harold Fitch contains, as Eleanor's letter stated, 2,847 photographs. Gerald has them now, in a storage unit in Clifton whose combination was Harold's birthday. Gerald has been going through them slowly, an hour at a time, the way you approach something that has waited a long time for you. Soon-Yi Park, born 1959 in South Korea, immigrated in 1981, worked at the Route 9 address, then the newly built Store King, from 1993 to 2001 inches a night security role. Eleanor documented her through the transition period when the building changed operators. The archive for Park contains approximately 2,400 photographs. Petra has been trying to locate her. She found a possible address in Flushing, Queens, earlier this week. Dale Pruitt, that's me. The archive for me contains 341 bundles, each averaging 43 photographs. I have not done the full arithmetic. I don't think I need to. 5 watchmen, 5 people who stood between other people's stored things in the dark, and who were themselves observed by a single careful family carrying out, across 3 generations, an act of witness that no one asked for and that I am still not certain how to classify. I know it changed me. I know that standing in front of Unit 214 every night, knowing that somewhere in this building's structure there is a record of 3 years of my ordinary life, that knowledge has changed how I inhabit my own days. I notice more. I notice the temperature of the coffee when I pour it, and the particular sound the north entrance gate makes when the wind is from the east, and the way the sky goes from black to purple to gray over Route 9 inches the hour before my shift ends. I don't know if that's what Walter intended. I don't know if it matters whether it was intended, but I notice. Now, I am no longer underexposed. Part 35. Eleanor. Cho found her in late May, not through any investigative breakthrough. Eleanor had told the truth in her letter. The address was there, on the bottom of the page.